Hey there! In this video we will be learning some important tips and tricks for a formal and informal place setting, or commonly called a table setting. Some of the learning outcomes of this video is a formal place setting for a 7-course menu, 4-course menu, a 4-course menu with some variations, as well as an informal place setting for a 3-course menu. So let's go into it. So, you're working at the event center and your chef has set a 7-course menu for a formal sit-down banquet event, which means the food will be pre-plated, prepared from the kitchen and will be served to the guests on the table. For the guests to eat the food, they require the right glassware, flatware or cutlery, and chinaware or crockery. In some hotels we call this CCG. Cutlery, crockery, glassware. So, let's go ahead and set up the table now. To do this, you request your manager or your supervisor to help you understand how to set up the table in the correct way. And they quickly set up the table for you. And now it's your responsibility to set up the rest of the event center. Now that may have looked a little complicated, but with the tips and tricks that you will learn right now, I'm confident that you will find it very easy to set up the rest of the event space. First and foremost, the most important thing is to place the charger or the dinner plate exactly in the center of your setup for your cover. This is the main plate which is kept right in front of the guest. It should be 1 inch from the edge of the table. Once you set your charger or your dinner plate, laying the rest of the cutlery on the table and the glassware will be comparatively easier. In this menu, our first course is oysters. However, in any 7-course menu or 3-course menu or in any kind of place setting, always remember that the cutlery is used from the outside towards the inside, which means the first set of cutlery that is used for the first course will be used from the outside, and the guests will gradually work their way through all the cutlery and reach the last dessert cutlery which is kept on top. So, for the first course, our chef is serving oysters. For oysters, we'll be using an oyster fork. The oyster fork is probably the only fork that we keep on the right side of our setup. Our second course is the creamy tomato soup, for which we will be using a soup spoon. Always remember, spoons and knives go on the right side of your setup with the exception of the side knife. Forks are set up on the left side of the setup of the place setting with the exception of the oyster fork. Our third course is salad, which is garden fresh greens in this case, or it is your appetizer course, for which you'll be using the salad fork or the salad knife, or the appetizer fork and the appetizer knife. They're both the same thing. The fourth course is our fish course, and the chef is serving us pan-seared salmon for this course. Always remember for a fish course to use the fish fork and the fish knife. This is the fork that looks a little different from the other forks, and the knife that also looks a little different from the other knives. Whenever you have a fish item served in the main course as well, if it is repeated, make sure you repeat the cutlery as well. For the fifth course, we are having asparagus risotto, which is a rice. It could also be a poultry item, or it could be a rice with a poultry item and some vegetables. For this, we will use a dinner fork and the dinner knife. Our sixth course is the entree, and in this case it is a steak. Now, whenever we're eating steak, we have to cut through the meat, which is slightly tougher than poultry. Hence, we need a knife which is a little sharper than our dinner knife. And hence, we use a knife with a slight serration on it and a sharper blade called a steak knife or a meat knife, along with a dinner fork. Last but not least is our 7th course, which is our baked caramel cheesecake, the most delicious course of them all. For this, we will be using the dessert cutlery, which is the dessert fork, and the dessert spoon, which is placed on top. However, before the course is served, it is our responsibility to place the dessert cutlery in the right position. The dessert fork should be on the left side and the dessert spoon should be on the right side of the plate. Don't forget your side plate and your side knife, which is on the extreme left. This is also called the bread and butter plate or the bread and butter knife, commonly called the B&B plate and the B&B knife. And this is your setup of your flatware and your chinaware of your setup. Now, let's talk about the glassware. But before we talk about the glassware, let's talk about the sharp blade that is there on the knives. Always remember that the knives should always point towards the left. Now let's start setting up our glassware. Like the cutlery, even the glassware is put in a particular sequence. The glass that will be used first will be closest to the guest, and the last course or the last glass that will be used will be furthest away from the guest. The first glass will be the white wine glass, which will be paired with the appetizer or the salad. The second glass will be the red wine glass, followed by the champagne flute, and followed by the water goblet or the water glass towards the end. It's important when you're completing these setups to make sure that the cutlery is always placed in a straight line. This is also called the baseline. The baseline should be half an inch or an inch from the end of the table or the rim of the table, not more than that. Like we have the baseline to make sure that the cutlery is in a straight line, we also use a glass line to make sure that the glasses are in a straight line as well. These are of course virtual lines and just help us set up our place setting in the right manner. And with that, you're pretty set up for this event. This is your 7-course formal place setting. Now, this is a fairly large setup. If you have many covers on the table, then you can have some space constraints, and hence it's acceptable to move the side plate and the side knife on the top left corner. However, when you're doing so, make sure that you put the side knife at an angle so that the guest can use their right hand to access the knife in an easy manner. And that completes our training for a formal place setting for a 7-course menu. Now, when we are setting up for a formal place setting for a smaller menu, maybe a 4-course meal, your setup will change slightly. So let's see what that setup could look like. This is the standard setup for a 4-course menu. We have a soup course, a salad or an appetizer, a main course, and a dessert. And hence we have only 3 glasses as well over here. We have a white wine glass, a red wine glass, as well as a water glass. For the main course, we'll be using a dinner fork and a dinner knife. However, the main course can change, and in the next main course, we could probably have fish. So hence, in the setup where the fish is a main course, we'll be using a fish fork and a fish knife. The rest of the setup remains the same. Our next variation could be a steak in the main course, and hence we'll be using a steak fork and a steak knife and a dinner fork for this setup. Again, if the setup is very tight and you have a lot of covers on the table, you can keep the side knife and the side plate on the top left corner with the knife placed at an angle like we learned earlier. However, in some setups, we'll be using an informal place setting. In an informal place setting, we can remove a few more utensils from the table. This is what an informal place setting would look like. Again, there could be variations. Depending on the menu, we may have a 2-course place setting or a 3-course place setting. This setup right now is set up for a 3-course informal place setting. In some situations, you could also just have a soup spoon, a dinner knife, and a dinner fork along with a water glass on the table, or a pocket fold with a particular setup. And that completes the informal place setting. Last but not least, whether it's a formal place setting or an informal place setting, don't forget your guests love the most important, tea and coffee. Serve your guests some tea or coffee so that they can end their meal and have a fabulous time at your event. After you complete setting up the entire event center, your setup should look a little bit like this. It looks beautiful once the entire room is set up. I hope you enjoyed this training video. Bon appetit! Thank you so much for watching.